Today, I have an absolute pleasure in welcoming Louise. Louise, give us a wave. Yes, you just did. Thank you, Louise. Louise is one of our coaches, specializing in a number of areas from helping with CVs to helping people think about their careers, pivoting, etc. And I'm sure Louise is going to do a much better job of introducing herself than I am. So I'll leave that to you, Louise. Um, Today's question is, tell me about yourself. We all get asked that many, many times a week in our careers, I'm sure, whether that's meeting somebody in the lift or over lunch, and having the opportunity to make an impact, or if we're going for an interview, tell me about yourself. Introductions, tell me about. These are one of the biggest opportunities to make an impact. And I, for one, sometimes get it horribly, horribly wrong. Sometimes I've come away and think, yeah, that was all right. Rarely do I think, yeah, I made that real impact that I wanted to make there. So Louise is a bit of an expert in this, Louise. I'm going to pass over to you to take the session on from here, but normal rules apply. Interrupt, get involved, put your hands up, ask questions, make an impact. Let's make this a friendly E2W community hour together. Louise, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Katie, for inviting me. Well, hello, everybody. I'm looking forward to talking to you today and working with you, because this is going to be an interactive session. So I have got a few slides that I'm going to share with you in a moment, and I'm going to set the theme for why this is so important. And then we're going to actually get into the practical part of Tell Me About Yourself. So what we're doing really is looking to understand how to create that compelling, concise statement that conveys our value, who we are, our professional brand, and what is different about us, what makes us unique. So Mark, hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to say after every interaction that you were happy with what you said. So please do interrupt. I might not be able to see the chat when I'm talking and presenting. So Katie and Mark are going to interrupt me if there are questions, but please do get involved, because as Mark said, I talk about this a lot. So it may be that I mention things that don't make sense to you. So please do stop me and ask as we go. So let's have a look at some content. Let me just pull this up here and just let me know that you can see the slides. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Katie. So let's think about why this is so important. It should be a really easy question. When someone says, so tell me about yourself, it should be so easy to answer because it's about us and we know all about us. But the challenge is whether this is in an interview scenario or networking. And by networking, it's not just that formal networking, but as Mark said, you bump into someone. Oh, hi, we haven't met before. Tell me about yourself. Many of us do stumble, or we blurt out a life story, or we start, for an interview, we start reciting our CV from when we left school. So there are all sorts of ways that we can stumble and get stuck with this. So thinking about what we want to do, we want an answer that is simple and that is structured and it's easy to remember so that we can answer that question successfully. So let's think about why this question is asked. What do people actually want to know? And what do we want to convey with it? Aside from our brand and who we are and giving them the information that they're looking for, we want to demonstrate that we are articulate and self-aware. We want to demonstrate that we can select relevant information to share. And also, we want to demonstrate that we can communicate information clearly and concisely. So we're demonstrating some of our skills when we're doing this, as well as providing information. Also, every interaction, every time someone says, tell me about yourself, this is an opportunity to promote you, what you do, and how you have impact. So the answer is also going to provide evidence of achievements, and it sets the scene to talk further. It's not everything, it's an opening. So it sets the scene to invite further questions. It's an opportunity for you to build on what you've talked about to demonstrate your strengths and the results as the conversation develops. So think about it as a springboard. It's that jumping off point. So what we need to do then is create a pitch. Sometimes this is called an elevator pitch, or it's sometimes called a value proposition that demonstrates who you are, what you bring to a role or an activity, how you generate results, and how you're adding value. So it's not just about you as a professional, it's about how you contribute to the business and have an impact. So if that makes sense so far, let me know. Give me a thumbs up or a wave. If anyone's got questions, let me know. Okay, fantastic. So what's the formula? What's the magic formula? It is this. It has 5 steps. There are various formulas you can follow, but this is my go-to, and it's been very successful. This has been tested, so we know that it works. So we've got these different stages. They're very clear, but what they do is they blend together. They create a narrative. You can do a bit of mixing and matching, so it's not a pure structure that you have to follow. But the beginning, who you are, and the end point of the conversation will be quite fixed. What you do in the middle is about you creating your story. So let's think about the components of that story. So who are you? So by this, what's your role? What's your specialism, your job title? So for example, I am a career coach, writer, and transition specialist. That's who I am professionally. What do you do? What do you do? So what's your area, your role, your deliverables? So in a simple line, what do you do? It's a big question, but we're looking for a concise answer. And you can play around with this. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to play to create that story. And then we're looking for some evidence of your key strengths that you're bringing in here. So we don't want everything. This is not a list of everything that you can do. But what we want, what are your strengths? What experience and knowledge do you have that you're bringing into this space? If you're interviewing, keep these relevant to the role. That's the difference between general networking and interviewing. So as you prep this for an interview, look at the job description, think about what you've heard, what is the listener looking out for, and tailor this to what they want to hear in an interview. And then the purple, how do we generate results? How do we create impact? How do we add value? So this is just 1 or 2 brief examples. Again, nothing lengthy, it's just a springboard to invite more questions and a conversation. One great example might be all you need. Okay. Now, this might be the point if you're at an interview, for example, where you can include some background. This might be a whistle-stop journey through your career. It might be what your career is founded on, to give it some context, or to show progression and promotion and gravitas. You might want to demonstrate depth of experience or breadth of experience in an interview. So there is a stage here, and I'll give you some examples, where you can add some background. And then we're closing. So what you're looking for in the future. So if you're in a networking situation, so looking ahead, I'm really interested in this, and try and make it connect to the person you're networking with, give them something to come back in the conversation with. Or if you're in an interview situation, why are you interested in this role? Okay. So does that make sense as a structure? Anybody unclear? Got some nods going? Okay. So that's it. That is it. Almost. The challenge is that you need to do that in less than 2 minutes. So this is not about writing a big essay. This is about highlights. If you imagine your career is like a large department store, and in that store, there are lots of different departments, sections, everything you've ever done is in that department store. When we create a CV or a LinkedIn profile or an interview answer, what we're looking for are just some highlights to pull into the shop window. This is not about everything you've ever done, everything you're capable of. It's just curating that shop window so it is clear, concise, and relevant to the audience passing by. Okay. So what I've done, if we bear in mind these colours, we've got the who, the what, the strength, the result, and the future. What I've done is I've colour coded an example for you. So this is my tell me about yourself. This is one of the ones that I use. So you can see who I am is relatively short. We're not looking for those lengthy descriptions. So then you can see what I do. I focus on helping people identify their strengths, etc. You can read the slide. So the third piece in green, strengths, experience, knowledge. And then already we're moving into some of the value add, the generating results with the purple. And what you can see in the second paragraph, I go back to strengths and results. I've given some background. I've got a pit stop there on my career, just to give it some context. You know, how did I become a coach? The fact that I've actually changed careers and I'm on my fourth career that led me to do it. It just gives it some context, some depth. Okay, and then looking for ways to think about how I move my practice forward. What am I looking for in the future? Okay, so we've got who I am, what I do, strengths and results blended, and what I'm looking for in the future. So does that make sense as a structure? Thank you very much for the thumbs up, Cecile. Thank you, Mark. Any questions? I'm going to share another example with you now. So let's think about a different example. It's more blended, but it's got all of the key components. Okay.
Louise, is it good to have a couple of these kind of, you know, in your head that you know kind of well to suit the different situations? So perhaps if you've got a kind of hybrid career and you're interviewing or you're having conversations about two different types of roles, so not a one size fits all.
It does. It helps to have a core structure. So thinking about the actual structure, these points, going back to, if I just go back to the 5, whoops, you go backwards rather than forwards. Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second, I'll go back and share. Okay, so let's just go back. So it's useful, Katie, to have this structure in mind, because once you've got the structure in mind, you can then start to play with it. So you might want to think about the what you do, the strength and the purple of the generating results. Those are the ones that are going to flex the most. And as I say, what you're looking for in the future, that might be quite generic in a networking conversation. So you might have 2 or 3 answers, again, depending on the event you're at. But also, this is going to be highly tailored if you're going into interviews. So I don't recommend having too many. It can get really confusing. But what I do recommend is that you think about the context and the structure. What is relevant to the situation? The challenge is if you have 4 or 5, will you remember which one you're using?
Sarah, you have your hand up. Sorry, Sarah, you have your hand up.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, haven't got a mouse yet. I'm doing it on the board. I've recently been made redundant from my role, and I'm at liberty to take a break for a while. So the questions, who am I and what do I do? The way we're looking at it is obviously intrinsically linked with your current role and your current career. So do you have any tips or advice for those of us that aren't currently working and don't know necessarily where we're going next?
I do.
Please.
I've walked in those shoes, Sarah. I've definitely walked in those shoes. So what I've done there and what I've done with clients is to talk about, so, you know, I'm currently taking a break. Most recently, I was X, and I've been doing that for 15 years. And in terms of what I'm looking for, I'm exploring So you're bringing more of the future into the first part of the conversation. In terms of how I got here, this is what I've done. This is my strengths, evidence, and the results. So you're just playing with the order. You just bringing the future into the part. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It is that thing of when you're not working, what do you say? So I'm currently taking a break.
Okay, thank you.
Cecile.
So I'm myself on a break, actually, if that helps. And I was told that you should add the break after you introduce yourself. And I think if you've been on a break and any achievement that are relevant, you could add them to your proposition. Do you agree or not?
Absolutely. Is it something that's going to spark interest in the other person? So I've been on a break, I've been doing this, or, introduce something that is going to spark interest in the other person to get the dialogue going. The whole point of doing this is not you talking at someone. It's giving them enough material for them to pick on something to ask their next question. So what might be an example, Cecile, of something you've done on your break?
So I have explored ESG investment, and I have personally invested in ESG. And I also have completely reorganized my finances, my budget. I've done my budget, my planning. So I have improved on my all of these skills.
Yeah. And talk about what led you to that. What sparked your interest in that? So think about how you got there and explain that context as you go. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so again, another question.
It doesn't have to be everything. Sure.
Do you recommend that we learn this proposition by heart, or at least have the biggest point in the head? How would you recommend that we prepare for this speech? Even though it's evolving, it depends on the situation.
I think the best way forward, given my client's experience and my own experience, is to learn one of them.
Okay.
And then you mix and match. So if you think about, you're going out on stage, you don't want to be improvising when you get out there. You want to go out with some core material. So even if you're going to be improvising in the moment in an interview, there's a huge amount you can prepare before you go out there. So I think the more practice you do, practice makes perfect. One of the things I also recommend you do is to rehearse it live. One of the things that goes wrong when we're creating the tell me about yourself answer is that people write it out and think that they're done. When we say something out loud, it has a very different flow to how it's written. So when you've created something, I suggest that you practice it. So say it out loud, record it, play it back. Does it flow? Or are you just pulling together a collection of sentences? Flow is really important with it. It has to sound natural. So, come on.
Hey, Louise. Are there any tips to suggest how do we confine everything into 2 minutes? Because when I'm usually preparing for it, when I think about it, I end up thinking I have to ensure that I tell this to the interviewer and this and this and this. And then by the time I actually rehearse it, it's already like 10 minutes and I'm talking. And I want to make sure that they know these things about me, but it's a challenge to fit everything in 2 minutes and sort of ensure that they ask me these questions so I'm able to explain them.
Yeah, it's always about being concise. And again, you don't have to tell them everything. You're just in that shop window. If they want to explore the entire department store, they can ask questions and you can guide them around. But this is just about the shop window. So if you look at the slide, can you still see the slide? Be okay? So let's have a look at the slide. Sorry, they disappeared. Go back to them. Okay. So how long do you think this slide would take to say?
I think about 2 to 3 minutes at the max.
Exactly. Yeah. When I read it, it's depending how fast I go, I can make this into 1 minute and 3 seconds. I can make it come out to 2 minutes. But it's really hard to get this in over a minute and a half. But when you think about the amount of information that is crammed in here, there are all sorts of opportunities for someone to ask me questions. So I've created that shop window, that introduction, and I've given them lots of opportunities to latch onto something about my skills, something about my experience, something about the background. Yeah. So the thing is, Kamal, when you're preparing anything like this, when you're preparing interviews, again, you don't need to tell them everything. So whether we're doing any kind of brand communication, we have the rule of CCR: clear, concise, relevant. Yeah. So write something down and test it and see how long it takes you to say it out loud. And be brutal. They can always ask you more. So, you know, one of the ways, if you're not sure you've covered everything, is you get to the end of this and you say, does that give you the information you were looking for? Would you like me to talk about anything else in more detail? Okay. So invite them in at the end.
All right, thank you. That's really helpful.
You're welcome. It's a great question. It is a great question. Basically, if you've got more than a page of text, you need to start editing. Absolutely. Any other questions? Anybody thinking what theirs might look like? I'm not going to pressure anybody into volunteering, but if anybody would like to have a go at this.
Louise, I had a question. So I'm just starting my sort of journey on job search. I'm still working on my CV, having not done one for 18 years, which is proving quite challenging. I've come across positioning statements. So is this sort of elevator pitch the same thing as a positioning statement?
It's very similar. It's you creating that summary. So when you're thinking about it, you know, what is it you want to say? And I think the other thing, particularly when you've had that time gap, is to think about who you are now and what you want to be known for now. Because who you were got you here, but think about what's going to take you forward. So if you were creating something like this, you have years of experience, you know, you've taken a break, but you, again, the same with Cecile, you might be pulling in what you're looking for in the future much earlier on. So you might want to play with the order. But yeah, it's very similar to a positioning statement. They have lots of different names: pitch, elevator pitch, brand, proposition, value proposition. They're fundamentally the same thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Is this making sense as we read this?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try an activity with you. I'm going to give you another one. I'm going to ask you just to read this to yourself and see if it works. So when we're looking at this, think about what's there. Think about what's not there. What might you add? What might you change? Think about, does it work? Does it not work? What more do we want to know?
Sarah's put in the chat. I think I agree that it's a bit dry. It's kind of there to the point, but there's nothing really, there's no flavour, there's no personality there.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sarah. There are no hooks. There's very little here to get hold of for someone to ask a question. So, okay, it is a bit dry. Not much personality going on in here. Okay. Any other comments? I can see some in the chat, Katie. Very factual.
Factual about what they've done as opposed to what they've achieved.
And it's not about them. Yeah. It's a collection of facts, essentially. It's not a story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Elspeth's put it doesn't give much on future prospects and what they want to achieve long term. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very closed. So this is why I think looking at them, looking at different examples and doing a bit of a critique is important to understand what makes the story effective. And it is more personality, it is more of the journey. So if we go back to the previous example, we know the journey. My career foundation was built in. What I've been focusing on for the last 5 years in my role is we've just got much more story. It's much more personal. It's still factual, but it has a very different tone. And also it's that call to action. So if we think about marketing, these are marketing tools. We are marketing the service that we provide as professionals. It's that call to action, this piece at the end that brings someone into that conversation. So we're inviting them in by the call to action. This is why what we're interested in the future is so important. And whether that goes at the beginning or it goes at the end, we need to make sure that invitation is very clear.
Question for you, Louise. So, Cecile, I'm going to pick up on the point that you just made when you said it felt like a cut and paste from a CV. Should a CV be flat and boring? And wouldn't it be better to use this text in your CV on your LinkedIn profile that you're showing on screen now, rather than this could be reused across many channels, can't it, Louise?
It can. This to me feels more like LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a conversation with your reader.
Yeah.
I think on CVs, particularly the way that CVs are used, whether they're read by machines or people, they're much more about being able to quickly extract information. So this is probably too much of a story, too personal for a CV, to my mind, because it's thinking about the purpose of this CV. I think, though, Mark, there is a space that if you're sending out speculative CVs, you would probably want more of the story in there. So, but you look at as many CVs as I do. What do you think, Mark? What's your view?
So everybody reads a CV differently, don't they? And I look for the person. I really do. Mostly when I'm looking through, and having something like this that's easy to read and tells me that story, I find preferable to the example you've just given of the senior leader.
Yeah, I mean, you could use this on a CV profile. You would simply take out the I, as most CVs are written in third person. Sales strategy leader with over 25 years experience shaping the vision, career foundation built at, I think it's the fact that this is a story. It's not just a list of experience. It's not just a list of skills. It's not just a list of facts. So whether you're writing in first person or third person, I agree with you. That profile on the CV is about creating a compelling story, same as it is with your pitch. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic. No, it's a great point. Okay. Cecile, did you have another question?
No, I was going to point out that you should have some numbers, right? Even in your proposition, each or not, at least one or two.
It depends if you have them. So if you do, then yes, I would recommend you include them as measures. And it's thinking about what those measures might be. So obviously we've got a statistic in this example, but there may be situations where, in coaching, for example, we don't necessarily have metrics. So in the kind of work that I do, it's more about focusing on the change, the value add. But if you do have statistics, then absolutely, I would recommend you use them. Any kind of metric, it's helpful to tell your reader about the scale and scope of what you've done and delivered. Okay. Would anybody like to have a go? Anybody feeling particularly brave? This is where everybody turns their camera off normally and pretends that they've got another meeting to go to. Did anyone want to have a look at this one and see what they would do differently? Use this as a structure.
I don't mind giving it a go just on my own one.
Yeah,
if nobody else wants to.
I don't think they do, no. So thank you for stepping up.
I'm using my notes as a crib sheet with the order of questions. So, hi, I'm Sarah Baxter. Currently, I'm a writer. I've started writing a book. My previous experience has been in banking, so I've worked in banking for 39 years, and invariably I've found myself writing. I've written procedures, work instructions, guidance papers, just so many things. So this is how I find myself where I am today. Part of this, I have also trained people, so my strengths are in coaching, listening to people. Something I've done recently is placing complete trust in people, and I've delegated things. So I've built up really good teams on that premise. What I'm looking for in the future is to get my books published, either self-published or through a publisher. So I'm going to be looking into how to do that and complete this next chapter of my story.
Fantastic. Can we just give her a round of applause? Well done. Thank you so much for stepping up. And what a compelling story. So do we have any feedback that we can share? Anything that we can give Sarah as feedback?
I think it's really great, Sarah, that you recognise that you're having a transition or a pivot in your career, and actually how those skills have led you to do and be good at what you're trying to do now. I think it's really good to recognise that.
Thank you. I've recognised it mainly from attending various webinars and forums, so just speaking out loud. So I had all those various skills and things, and I've just been joining my own dots, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see how you've taken, if we go back to the content and structure, we can see though how Sarah's taken the structure but made it work for the story that she's telling. So it doesn't always have to run in this order. You can play around depending on the context. But so hearing that, Sarah, if you were to do it again, is there anything you would add or change now you've heard it out loud?
I know I jumped around in the middle, but that's because I was doing it off the cuff, as it were. So yeah, I'd probably take what you said and do a recording of myself and shift the order maybe of some of the things that I said in there, because I'm aware it didn't quite flow.
I mean, it was a great first attempt. It was very, very strong. I think.
Thank you.
How can we take good to great? So it was good. How do we take it to great? So I think possibly more about your experience. You know, what did you learn from doing these things? So you told us what you did. Maybe we can invite you to reflect on the value that those added. You might focus, for example, on, you told us about what you did with training, with coaching. What was the impact of that? What were you recognized for? I think the other thing as well, we knew that you were doing this for a long time. I didn't get a strong sense of your progression within that. So how did you arrive into this place and your progression? So there are bits that you can add to build the story out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. I have got another question actually. So a lot of the stuff that I've achieved literally in the last year was born out of actually being off unwell for some time. So I was off for about 8 months with anxiety and depression. And what I learned in therapy about well-being, looking after yourself, I brought to my team, and you know, the engagement score levels, they were really low, and I just worked with them and we got everything up to 100%. And I can't tell that story without the backstory to it, but that was a really big achievement for me. So I don't know whether to include it, leave it out, or what to do with that, because that's the most recent.
Well, we could think about shaping the story so that there are details you can include. So you might say, from my own development and learning, I brought to my team and talk about what you did with the team, how you increased the score. Because to Cecile's point, it gives you a metric. The fact that you took low engagement scores and got them to 100% gives you a metric. So that's the result. So we don't always have to tell all of the story of how we got here. We can talk about how we got here and what we did with it. So yeah.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for stepping up as a volunteer. And it's a really interesting story because immediately you can connect who you are with what you're doing now and then fill in the picture for us. So yeah, great structure.
Caroline, did you? Sorry, Louise, I was just going to say Caroline.
No, I'm seeing if there are any more volunteers. So yeah.
Yeah, unmute. Right. Okay. Can we keep the slide up while I do it? Please.
Of course.
I'm Caroline Holmes. I am a change and transformation specialist. My background was 18 years management consulting, and then I moved into financial services for the last 10 plus years. I have specialized in regulatory change because that's what's been dominating this sector most recently. And my last role was in a financial services fintech startup where I did absolutely everything with a job title of COO, but in a smaller organization, you do what it takes. I think my strengths are getting things done. I pay a lot of attention to detail, and I'm not scared to operate across all levels, walking into boards and presenting, but actually working to the front line. How I get things done is generally to build teams and get people on side. People skills in change, very important, and mainly in organizations, they've been in change overload. And so you have to recognize that people have their day jobs to manage as well. But I'm very aware of that, and I'm very good at working in cross-functional organizations. And I really look forward to the future in this industry and leveraging all of the really exciting technologies that will enable people to work smarter and better and free up their time to focus on more value add activities. There you
go. Round of applause. Caroline, that was great. That was great. One of the things that you did was really interesting there. You gave us a strength. My strength is that I get things done. And then you took us on the journey, how I get things done. So there was a really lovely arc between a strength and a result. So that was really nice to hear. It's logical, it flows, it's clear. And I, for one, have got lots of quite specific questions I want to ask now. So it invites us in. But how did it feel?
It felt fine, but the problem is I just did it off the cuff. I haven't got that written down. I probably wouldn't say the same thing again. I found it really useful to have just this really simple slide in front of me while I did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about having the structure there, the framework. It doesn't have to dictate the content, but it certainly holds the content, which is why just having 5 things to think about is enough. And take the flow and work with it. Fantastic. And then as you reflect back, everybody, any feedback for Caroline? What can we give her in this space?
It's a really strong and exciting conclusion as to where you're going next and the value that will add for everyone, I think. It was really nice.
It was really great how Caroline's talking about her, but then suddenly she takes it outwards. And that's something that's going to impact all of us. We're all going to be curious about what happens next. So I think that was a really great way to take it from the personal out into a wider space. So yeah, really effective ending.
It was very credible. Like it sounded like you had evidenced everything you were saying, which was really, really interesting. It kind of left me wanting to ask questions, but it didn't leave kind of holes in what you were saying either.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm really wondering what all the questions are, but I don't want to take too much.
Let's save those for another time. But I think it's also then just playing with it. So you've done, like you say, this is off the cuff and it works. So what more could you do with it? And also then think about adapting it to different situations that you may find yourself in. But you've got a very strong core. Both of the ones we've heard, they have different structures, but they're very strong structures to hang everything else on. So thank you. Thank you, Caroline. Any other thoughts? Anybody else want to step up and have a go? This is a safe environment to do that. It is judgment-free. No. So I'm going to ask Mark a question. So when you arrived with us, Mark, you were saying that you don't always get this right. Did this structure work for you, do you think?
Do you want me to give it a go?
Only if you want to. I don't want to push you. I really don't want to push you. But just answering the question, does the structure help?
So it certainly does. And I am going to give it a go. So I'm Mark Freed. Through my work at E2W, me and my team are passionate about closing the gender gap in financial services. We do this in 3 ways. And I personally have got over 20 years experience in helping and supporting women to succeed and flourish in their financial services careers. With unequaled and unparalleled access to a huge community of women working in the sector through our recruitment business, we also help selected asset managers and corporate and investment banks to recruit and retain more women into their senior ranks, helping them to meet their diversity targets. We also help firms through our Men for Inclusion initiative to bring their often passive straight white men to become more passionate and active supporters of D&I strategies. I'm talking to you today because I want you to do one of those 3 things.
Fantastic. It's different, isn't it, when you do it for a company, but the flow is very similar.
Yeah.
We know who you are, what you do. Sorry.
I get that mixed up all the time, is talking about. I don't want it to be I, because there's Katie, Sunita, and a whole bunch of other people, working with me on this. So yeah, I want it to be we, which is when it starts talking about the company.
Mm-hmm. But it's still, you can use exactly the same structure.
Yeah.
You can use the same structure when you're pitching an idea or a project, when you're engaging stakeholders. So you can just change who you are to what it is. So if you were pitching an idea or a project, what is it? What does it do? Where's it come from in terms of its substance? How does it add value, and where will it take the business? So thinking about this kind of structure, it's useful in all different scenarios. It really is. I was just going to pick up, Stephanie posted, when we were looking at the example, how do they make a difference was one of the questions that she came up with. And I just wondered if all of you know how you make a difference. So think on that while I take Sarah's question.
Thank you. My question, and it was listening to Mark, all of those questions in the content and structure, there isn't a why there. Should we ever include the why? So I want to know why Mark does what he does and how he got into it, a man in amongst so many women and battling our cause with us. You don't have to answer that now, Mark, but I'm just so curious about the why with things in general.
So, Sarah, the reason why I often leave it out is because it's the question everybody asks. So it does create, leaving it out actually, I know, creates a, well, why are you doing this, Mark?
Yeah. It creates the hook, doesn't it? It's the immediate question you want to know.
Right.
So Mark, what led you to be so passionate about this? So he's opened the door by leaving it out.
We have 11 minutes left, so the very quick answer born into and brought up in a very inclusive home. Just as likely to see my dad doing the washing and the ironing as my mum. Both parents went out to work. Dyslexic, failed miserably at school because there was no inclusive teaching in those days. Went into an office environment where I saw things that happened in the workplace that didn't, in terms of inequality, that wasn't happening at home. Realized very quickly that if I was going to succeed, I needed to adopt male behaviors and leave some of my core at the door when I walked into the office. 23 years later, 23 years ago rather than later, decided I'd had enough of that and wanted to do something different about it.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering that. Very compelling. Okay. And Mark says, we've got 10 minutes left. Is there anything, does anyone struggle with this? Anybody looking at this thinking, oh, I just don't know what to do with it? Or have you been in situations where you've struggled and you've got any learning that you can share with the group?
Again, from my experience, for me, is the language, because I'm French, and that gives me a lot of anxiety preparing for my proposition. I find it more difficult to remember, but that's my own personal experience. And the first time I had an interview where I had to do it, it was far too long, but I didn't even know how to prepare for it. So that just went really, really too long. So now I've learned that I need to be prepared and that it needs to be short and concise.
Yeah. It's so easy to set off rambling in an interview situation. The advantage with this is if you have 5 digits, as I do, is that there are 5 points. So if I'm working with a client, what we'll do is we'll do the who, the what, the strength. So we literally count on fingers. And this is a kind of cognitive behavioral therapy tool to anchor the thought somewhere. So because it's got 5 points, if you have 5 digits, you can use them to help you remember.
Louise, are there things that we should absolutely avoid, particularly in an interview situation when we're asked that question?
Apart from rambling, keeping it concise, I think one of the things that it's really important to do, Mark, before you go into an interview is think about the listener for this, because it's not going to be as much about you. It's going to be about what they want to hear. So this is where having a very tailored tell me about yourself answer is important, because otherwise you might have your standard answer and you go in, tell me about yourself, but then actually you've not answered their question. Yeah. So as you go into interview prep, I would very closely tailor this to the job description, far more closely than if I was using it generally. Yeah. So
we run a careers club 3 or 4 times a year, and so Caroline's got a hand up and was on it. Quite often there, one of the first sessions we do, and I think you'll be involved in these and going forward, is ask the question, tell me about yourself. And we get well, I went to university, I left university and started work at Barclays, and then I went to Lehman's, and then I was exec something at UBS, and then I had a career break, and now I'm here.
Exactly.
And it's basically just reading the chronological order of the CV. So when I ask the question, what you should avoid, I think it's that.
The other question, and Carolyn, I will come to you in just a second. The other question is, when someone says, walk me through your CV, is to start now, not when you left school, because that's also a common interview error. So people say, walk me through your CV. They start at the end. Oh, I left school, I did this, I went to Barclays, as you say. So if someone asks you to, so walk me through your CV, always start with now. So currently I'm doing this has been very exciting, previously, and then once you've done kind of 5 to 8 years, you can say, do you want me to go back through the rest, or so I would always start with now. That's another interview tip. But Carolyn's had a hand up and her arm's probably aching, so come and talk to me.
Hi, Liz. So I have a question. So when you go to an interview, you normally have seen the job description, and you know what they are looking for, right? But if you are being contacted, like, LinkedIn or so, it's like, oh, I have a role here. Do you want to chat? But and then you literally have no hook where you can say, oh, I can do these things. How would you go about that? Just be, what would you do?
First thing I would do is try and get my question in before theirs. So tell me about this role that you've got. Mm-hmm. And as you're listening, you can assess whether or not it's right for you, but then you can start to think about what you might say. But on those exploratory conversations, they've either already seen your LinkedIn, they have an idea about why they're talking to you. So I would think any answer would tick some of their boxes at that early stage. So I wouldn't worry too much, but if you can ask them a bit about the job and weave that in, then great, but I won't worry too much about it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, I can see I've got a couple more things in the chat. How much personal outside work would you include? I think this depends, Katie, on the audience, doesn't it? So like Mark, I don't want to meet an automaton. I want to meet a real person. But so it's thinking about who you are professionally and bringing that into the space. I don't think, in terms of what do you do, telling me about, you're professional. And by the way, I really like golf. I'm not sure how relevant that is to the conversation. So think about that balance. I think where personality can come in is what motivates you, what drives you to do what you do. You might want to bring that in.